Imagine the unimaginable. A young boy, Lenny Quisley, declared dead not once but 3 times, defying all odds to come back to life. But his return was not just a miracle of survival, it carried a message. A message so extraordinary, so profound, that it could only originate from a realm beyond our earthly understanding. This is the story of Lenny, who crossed the boundary between life and death, ventured into the unknown, and returned with a warning that everyone needs to hear. If you've ever doubted the existence of an afterlife or wondered what happens after death, Lenny's story might hold the answers you've been seeking. It began on a seemingly ordinary Sunday in 2002. The Quisley family cherished their weekends together, following a simple routine. Mornings started with a trip to church, followed by a drive home to share lunch and relax as a family. On this particular Sunday, everything seemed as usual. Kayla Quisley, a loving mother, chatted with her husband, Mark, as they navigated familiar roads. Their young son, Lenny, sat in the back seat, gazing out the window, blissfully unaware of the tragedy that was moments away. The sun shone brightly through the car windows, casting a warm glow over the family. For Kayla, it felt like another peaceful day. She could never have imagined that these were her final moments with Mark. The comfort of their routine and the safety of being together as a family were about to be torn apart in an instant. Without warning, the serenity was shattered. The calm drive was interrupted by the piercing sound of ambulance sirens cutting through the air as it sped through an intersection. The Quisleys had no time to react. In a single moment, their car was struck with devastating force, spinning violently out of control. The sounds of screeching metal, breaking glass, and the immense impact engulfed them. Everything happened in a blur, like a horrifying dream unfolding in broad daylight. When the car finally stopped, an eerie silence fell, broken only by the distant, haunting wail of the ambulance sirens. When emergency responders arrived, the extent of the devastation was clear. The car was nearly unrecognizable, crushed under the force of the collision. Mark Quisley had tragically lost his life on impact. Kayla, though gravely injured, was miraculously alive but trapped in the wreckage. As rescuers worked tirelessly to free her, their attention turned to the small, lifeless body of Lenny in the back seat. He wasn't breathing. Lenny's condition was critical. Paramedics rushed him to the nearest hospital, doing everything in their power to keep him alive. His pulse was faint, his breathing shallow, and his body showed every sign of slipping away. Despite their desperate efforts, the unthinkable happened. Lenny was declared clinically dead. The medical team fought valiantly, exhausting every option to bring him back, but his body gave no response. It seemed that Lenny's time had ended before it had truly begun. Meanwhile, as Kayla lay in the hospital recovering from her injuries, she was informed of her husband's passing. The weight of the news was unbearable, but even as she mourned the loss of Mark, her thoughts were consumed by Lenny. She clung to the faint hope that her son could survive, even as doctors advised her to prepare for the worst. In the operating room, Lenny's battle was far from over. Twice more, his heart stopped. Twice more, he was declared dead. And twice more, the doctors managed to revive him just barely. Each time, it felt as though the door to the afterlife opened a little wider, with Lenny suspended between two worlds. The medical staff worked tirelessly, their faces etched with a mix of determination and quiet despair. It seemed as though they were fighting to anchor Lenny's soul to earth, even as unseen forces pulled him toward the unknown. Overwhelmed by fear and anguish, Kayla turned to prayer. Her words were raw and desperate, a mother's plea to save her child. "Please, God," she cried silently, "don't take him, not him too." For the doctors, the outlook was grim. Lenny's chances of survival were slim, and even if he did survive, they feared catastrophic brain damage. How could anyone endure being declared dead 3 times without devastating consequences? They warned Kayla that if Lenny awoke, he might not be the same boy she had loved and known. He could lose his memories, his personality, everything that made him who he was. Yet Kayla refused to let go of hope. Deep in her heart, she believed that her son's spirit was stronger than his fragile body. She held on to the belief that if Lenny returned, it wouldn't be as a shadow of himself, but as the vibrant, loving boy she had always cherished. As the weeks turned into months, Lenny Quisley remained in a deep coma, unresponsive, while machines worked tirelessly to keep his body alive. Kayla sat vigilantly by his bedside, holding his small hand, as if her touch alone could guide him back from the brink of the unknown. The medical staff, though professional, wore expressions that betrayed their skepticism. Cases like Lenny's rarely ended well, and their cautious monitoring reflected this grim reality. But Lenny's story was unlike any other. Though his body lay motionless, tethered to an array of machines, Lenny's consciousness was anything but dormant. He later recounted that it felt as though he had been lifted out of his physical body, leaving the sterile confines of the hospital far behind. He found himself in a radiant field of light, a place of extraordinary tranquility that defied earthly description. It felt dreamlike, yet far more vivid and real than anything he had ever experienced. Colors were brighter, sounds richer, and the peace was so profound it overwhelmed his senses. Lenny struggled to put the experience into words, but one thing was undeniable. He was in heaven. He described roads paved with shimmering gold that seemed to glow with their own internal light. The air around him wasn't lit by a sun, but by the very essence of the place itself, pure, unfiltered love and light. Then he saw them, figures illuminated by a soft golden glow. At first, they were indistinct, but as Lenny approached, a deep sense of familiarity washed over him. These weren't strangers. He was surrounded by relatives who had passed away long before he was born. Though he had never met them in life, their presence felt completely natural, as if he had always known them. Among the figures were two small children, their faces lit with warm, welcoming smiles. Lenny was puzzled. He didn't recognize them, yet they radiated an undeniable sense of comfort and love. It wasn't until much later, after his recovery, that he learned their identities. They were siblings he had never met, lost to miscarriages before his birth. Kayla had never spoken of them, yet here Lenny was, describing them in detail, from their appearances to the way they embraced him with unconditional love. And then he saw someone unlike any other, a figure that radiated a brilliance beyond comprehension. Lenny knew instantly who it was, though he had never seen him before. It was Jesus. No introductions were needed. The recognition was immediate and complete. Jesus' presence was overwhelming, but not in an intimidating way. His gaze carried no judgment, only an infinite depth of love. Lenny was moved to tears as he felt every earthly fear and doubt dissolve in that moment. Jesus didn't speak with words, but his message resonated within Lenny's very soul, as if his thoughts were being directly communicated. The words Lenny received would shape the course of his life forever. Jesus told him that his time had not yet come. He had a mission to fulfill, a purpose waiting for him on earth. He was to return and share a message of hope and faith with the world, to let people know that heaven is real, that life continues beyond death, and that each person has a divine purpose. Though the peace and beauty of heaven felt like home, Lenny understood what he had to do. He didn't want to leave, but he accepted his task with courage. In a flash, the serene vision vanished, and he felt himself being pulled back, as if by an invisible force, through a tunnel of light and warmth. Lenny's eyes fluttered open, adjusting to the harsh fluorescent lights of the hospital room. He was back. The medical team was stunned. After being declared clinically dead 3 separate times, Lenny had not only returned but was fully conscious and coherent. The doctors scrambled to assess his condition, expecting to find severe brain damage, loss of motor skills, or impaired memory. Instead, Lenny defied every expectation. He recognized his mother immediately, squeezing her hand with a strength that belied his frail appearance. Tears of relief streamed down Kayla's face as she realized her prayers had been answered. Lenny began to speak, his voice hoarse from weeks of silence, but the words he spoke left everyone in shock. He described in vivid detail his journey to heaven, the golden streets, the angels, and the overwhelming sense of peace. But what astonished Kayla most was when Lenny mentioned meeting his 2 siblings. He described their appearances and even their personalities, though she had never shared the painful truth of her miscarriages with him. The medical staff, who had witnessed many near-death experiences, were astounded. Lenny's story included details he couldn't possibly have known, adding an air of mystery and wonder to his miraculous recovery. For Kayla, the experience was bittersweet. While her son had returned to her, her husband's absence was a heavy burden on her heart. Yet Lenny's words brought her a sense of peace. Through his story, she felt a connection to her late husband and the belief that he, too, was in a place of light and love. As the days turned into weeks, Lenny's recovery astonished everyone. His physical wounds healed faster than anticipated, and his spirit seemed unbreakable. He began sharing his story with anyone who would listen, starting with his family, then the doctors, and eventually friends and strangers. He spoke with a conviction that transcended his years, driven by a mission to spread hope and faith. Lenny's journey to the edge of life and death became a story of inspiration. Though skeptics questioned the validity of his experiences, he didn't argue. He simply shared what he had seen and felt, leaving it to others to decide for themselves. Through his unwavering testimony, Lenny became a beacon of hope for those who had lost loved ones, offering a glimpse of the life waiting beyond this world. His story was not just about survival. It was about a divine message of love and purpose, one that he was determined to share with the world. The doctors and nurses were left bewildered. Lenny Quisley's detailed accounts of events and people he had no way of knowing raised more questions than answers. There was no scientific explanation for how he could describe such vivid and precise details. For Kayla, the experience was bittersweet. Her son had survived and brought back a profound message of hope, yet the loss of her husband weighed on her heart, a wound no miracle could fully mend. In the weeks that followed, Lenny's recovery defied every medical expectation. He regained his strength faster than anyone had anticipated, and his sharp mind remained intact. As his body continued to heal, Lenny began sharing his story with anyone who would listen. First, he spoke with his family, then the doctors, and eventually even strangers. His voice carried a depth and conviction that seemed far beyond his years, as though he had glimpsed truths most could never imagine. Lenny's story quickly spread, drawing people from near and far who were eager to hear his experiences. They sought answers, comfort, and reassurance in his words. While he admitted he didn't have all the answers, the calm certainty with which he spoke brought peace to those who listened. He shared the message Jesus had given him: to believe, to have faith, and to understand that death is not the end. Lenny described heaven as a place filled with light, love, and the promise of reunion with those we've lost, a truth that offered hope to so many. For Lenny, this experience was both a gift and a heavy responsibility. He understood that his miraculous second chance came with a mission. While many would doubt or even dismiss his story, Lenny accepted the weight of his calling with humility. He had seen heaven, felt Jesus' love, and been given a purpose that he embraced wholeheartedly. He resolved to share his story with as many people as he could, for as long as he could. Lenny's return from death left those around him in awe. But the significance of his experience only became clear when he began recounting the message he had received. The first time he shared it, his voice was weak and hoarse, barely above a whisper, as he lay in his hospital bed. Yet his words carried a profound power that was impossible to ignore. "Jesus told me it wasn't my time," Lenny explained, his gaze meeting his mother's tearful eyes. He said, "I have a mission. I need to go back and tell people about him, to let them know that heaven is real and that our lives have a greater purpose beyond what we see." For Kayla, hearing her son speak this way was surreal. Before the accident, Lenny had been a playful, curious boy full of energy. But now, he spoke with a gravity and wisdom that seemed far beyond his years. It was as though his experience on the other side had profoundly changed him. She couldn't help but wonder why her son had been chosen for this message and what it would mean for their future. As Lenny's story spread, reactions varied widely. Many were deeply inspired, moved by his miraculous survival and the hope he brought to a world filled with uncertainty. His testimony became a beacon of light for those grappling with grief or doubt. People who had lost loved ones found solace in his descriptions of heaven, clinging to the promise of a place where they could reunite. Churches began inviting him to share his testimony, and soon he was speaking to groups of all sizes, congregations, community gatherings, and anyone willing to listen. Despite his young age, Lenny spoke with a quiet confidence that made his words feel undeniably genuine. Not everyone, however, was ready to believe. Skeptics argued that Lenny's visions could be explained by science. They claimed that the bright lights and golden streets he described were likely hallucinations caused by oxygen deprivation or chemical reactions in the brain during trauma. To them, his experiences were merely the mind's way of coping with near-death. But Lenny never wavered in his story. He didn't argue with those who doubted him or try to force them to believe. Instead, he simply recounted what he had seen and felt, leaving it up to others to decide for themselves. His calm and sincere demeanor spoke volumes, and many found his words deeply moving, regardless of their initial doubts. Through his testimony, Lenny offered a message of hope, love, and faith to everyone who listened. He understood that this mission wasn't just about recounting his experience. It was about living his life as a reflection of the love and peace he had felt in heaven. And for Lenny, that mission was a privilege, one he embraced with unwavering determination. Kyla found herself consumed by a whirlwind of emotions. She felt immense gratitude for her son's survival, but the ache of losing her husband, Ryan, lingered, a hollow pain that no joy could erase. Ryan had been a kind man, a devoted father, and Kyla couldn't comprehend why God had chosen to take him while sparing Lenny. In her quiet moments of reflection, questions surfaced unbidden. Why had God saved her son but not her husband? Why had he chosen to reveal such a profound message to Lenny and not to her? There were no easy answers. Kyla wrestled with her grief and faith, struggling to reconcile the two. Over time, however, her perspective began to shift. She realized that her anger and confusion were natural stages of the grieving process, but she refused to let them define her. Lenny's words echoed in her mind, particularly when he spoke of the overwhelming peace and love he had experienced in heaven. These words provided her with a solace she hadn't been able to find on her own. Slowly, Kyla started to accept that there might be a plan beyond her understanding, a reason for why things had unfolded as they did. She found herself praying, not out of desperation, but from a longing to connect with the divine on a deeper level. Lenny's near-death experience opened a door in her heart, allowing her to find comfort in the belief that Ryan was at peace in a place of love and light, just as her son had described. Lenny's journey was far from over. His recovery was arduous and marked by physical therapy, surgeries, and moments of deep frustration. His body bore the scars of the accident, constant reminders of the trauma he had endured. Yet, Lenny faced these challenges with quiet determination, drawing strength not just from his physical resilience, but from the spiritual experience he had in the afterlife. He never complained about the pain or the difficulty of his recovery. Instead, he remained focused on the mission he had been given, to share his story and spread a message of hope and faith. As the years went by, Lenny began to speak publicly, sharing his testimony with larger audiences. He was no longer just a boy who had miraculously survived a horrific accident. He had become a messenger, a symbol of something greater. Traveling to churches, schools, and conferences, Lenny often stood before hundreds, sometimes thousands, of people. He recounted his experience with humility and sincerity, touching the hearts of everyone who heard him. He spoke not only about the beauty of heaven, but also about the pure, unconditional love he had felt from Jesus, a love so profound it brought tears to his eyes each time he described it. For many, Lenny's story became a source of comfort and inspiration. Those who had lost loved ones found solace in his words, seeing them as a sign that their departed family and friends were safe and at peace in the afterlife. Skeptics, too, found themselves questioning their disbelief, moved by the sincerity and depth of his testimony. Lenny had a unique ability to connect with people on a profound emotional level, as though he were tapping into a shared longing for proof of something greater than the struggles of daily life. Kyla watched her son with a mixture of pride and amazement. She had always known Lenny was special, but she could never have imagined the extraordinary path his life would take. She saw how his words brought healing to others, how they gave people hope and renewed their faith. In a way, it helped her heal as well. Each time she listened to Lenny speak, she felt her own sorrow lift, replaced by a growing sense of peace. It was as if she were beginning to see the divine tapestry of life, where every thread, even the painful ones, had a purpose. Lenny embraced the changes in his life wholeheartedly. He understood that his mission was not just about telling people what he had seen in heaven, but about living in a way that reflected the love and light he had experienced. He made it his goal to help others find their way back to faith, to remind them that hope exists even in the darkest moments. Lenny saw himself as a bridge between two worlds, carrying a message of love and reassurance from one to the other. As long as he had breath in his lungs, he was determined to continue sharing his story, fulfilling the mission Jesus had given him on that extraordinary day. In the end, Lenny's story was not just about a boy who returned from the brink of death. It was about a message that transcended time and space, a message that touched the essence of what it means to be human. It served as a reminder that we are all part of something far greater, that our lives hold meaning beyond what we can see or comprehend. For those who heard Lenny's words and took them to heart, it was a message that had the power to transform the way they viewed life, death, and everything in between.